I am Cherie, 67 years old, and retired after 30 years of nursing. My only son, Troy, 34, has been my greatest joy and deepest heartache. For decades, I supported him financially and emotionally through countless poor choices. When he texted, "I need space from your negative energy," before blocking my number, I was devastated. Weeks later, after losing his apartment, he called from a friend's phone. I watched it ring, feeling strangely calm as I set it aside. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments and hit subscribe if you have ever had to choose yourself over someone who only valued what you could give them. Life as a single mother was never what I planned. When my husband Douglas died of a heart attack when Troy was 8, my entire world shattered. Douglas had been healthy until that final day coaching Troy's Little League team one afternoon and gone by midnight. The doctors called it a congenital defect that had gone undetected. Just like that, I became both mother and father to our son. As a nurse at County Memorial, I was fortunate to have a steady income, but it was never quite enough. I picked up extra weekend shifts and holiday rotations to make sure Troy had everything he needed and most of what he wanted. Those early years were exhausting, but precious. Troy would sometimes wait up for me when I worked late, his small body curled on the couch with his favorite stuffed tiger, determined to give me a goodnight hug no matter the hour. The first signs of trouble appeared around age 10. While most of his friends expressed gratitude for birthday gifts, Troy began comparing his presents to what others received. "Jake got the deluxe set," he would say. His face twisted with disappointment over a toy that had cost me nearly an entire day's wages. Still, I convinced myself this was normal childhood behavior. By the time Troy entered high school, the entitlement had grown more pronounced. He expected new shoes when his old ones were barely worn, the latest video games on release day, and expensive clothes with the right labels. My attempts to discuss budgeting were met with sullen silence or accusations that I didn't want him to fit in. "You just want me to be a loser," he said once after I suggested waiting for a sale. Despite these concerning patterns, Troy had qualities that kept my hope alive. His art teacher called me during his sophomore year to praise his exceptional talent. Troy could create beautiful, detailed sketches that captured not just appearances, but emotions. I still have the portrait he drew of me on my 40th birthday somehow, managing to convey both my exhaustion and determination in a few pencil strokes. In those moments when he shared his gift, I glimpsed the sensitive soul beneath the entitled exterior. There were other moments, 2 unexpected bursts of thoughtfulness, that sustained me. When I caught pneumonia during his junior year and was bedridden for a week, Troy surprised me by keeping the house clean and learning to make my favorite soup from a recipe he found online. "You always take care of everyone else," he said, placing the slightly too salty broth on my bedside table. "Just let someone take care of you for once." These glimpses of compassion were what I held on to as I planned for retirement. I had visions of a close adult relationship with Troy, perhaps Sunday dinners and holiday gatherings where we would laugh about the difficult years behind us. I imagined him successful and settled, grateful for the foundation I had worked so hard to provide. His acceptance to the State University's prestigious art program seemed to confirm my hopes. Troy was genuinely excited, talking about famous alumni and potential career paths. For his first semester, he lived in the dorms but called me nearly every day, sharing stories about professors and classmates. I allowed myself to believe that our relationship had turned a corner. That illusion shattered during his sophomore year. The calls became less frequent, then stopped entirely for weeks at a time. When he did call, it was inevitably to ask for money beyond his tuition that my savings barely covered. "The art supplies are more expensive than they said," or "Everyone's going to this workshop in Chicago," became common refrains. I wasn't entirely surprised when he called one Tuesday in April, his voice small as he confessed he had stopped attending classes months earlier. "College isn't for me," he explained. "The professors don't understand my vision." When I asked about the tuition money I had sent for that semester, he admitted it was gone spent on networking opportunities, which seemed to translate to parties with other aspiring artists. This began a pattern that would define the next decade. Troy would move in with me, promising to save money for his own place. He would find a job, usually at a coffee shop or bookstore work, for a few months, then quit over some perceived slight from a manager. After each job loss, he'd spend weeks on my couch, scrolling through his phone and assuring me he was making important connections. Every few months he would announce he had found a place with roommates and move out, only to return when conflicts arose or bills came due. Each cycle left my savings account lighter and my heart heavier. Friends began to ask careful questions about when Troy might get on his feet, their concern barely masking judgment. 3 months ago, Troy announced he'd found the perfect apartment and a promising job at a graphic design firm. For once, I was cautiously optimistic. The job seemed legitimate, the apartment modest but in a decent neighborhood. I helped him secure the place by co-signing the lease and bought him a kitchen table, chairs, and bedroom set as a housewarming gift. "This is it, Mom," he said as we arranged the furniture. "I'm really going to make you proud this time." I wanted desperately to believe him. The pattern established itself so gradually that I hardly noticed it happening. At first, Troy would call or visit regularly, sharing updates about his new job and apartment. Then, almost imperceptibly, the nature of our interactions began to change. Casual conversations about his day were replaced by requests. "Mom, the electricity deposit was higher than I expected." "Mom, I need new clothes for work." "Mom, my car needs repairs." Each need came with promises of repayment that never materialized. Each crisis resolved led immediately to another. The only constants were Troy's certainty that none of these situations were his fault and my dwindling retirement account. Around this time, Troy began mentioning new friends, particularly a man named Garrett, who seemed to exert considerable influence. "Garrett says I'm underpaid at work," or "Garrett found this investment opportunity," became common phrases. When I suggested caution, Troy would bristle, accusing me of not wanting him to succeed or make connections. I tried setting boundaries in small ways. When he asked for money for work clothes, I offered to go shopping with him instead of handing over cash. His irritation was immediate. "I don't need you to babysit me," he snapped. "I know what's appropriate for my office." After an uncomfortable hour at the mall where his selections ran toward expensive designer items rather than practical office wear, he barely spoke to me for a week. The financial strain became increasingly difficult to ignore. I had planned carefully for retirement, calculating what I would need for healthcare, housing, and modest comforts. But no financial plan could withstand the constant emergency withdrawals Troy's lifestyle required. My financial advisor, Paula, began expressing concern during our quarterly meetings. "Cherie," she said gently, "at this rate, your savings may not last another 10 years. The most egregious incident occurred last winter. Troy called more excited than I'd heard him in months, describing an opportunity to join an exclusive art collective that could launch his career. "They've seen my portfolio, and they're impressed," he gushed. "I just need $3,000 for the membership fee and supplies." Against Paula's explicit advice, I transferred the money that day. 2 weeks later, I stopped by Troy's apartment unannounced, hoping to hear more about this promising opportunity. Instead, I found a gleaming motorcycle parked in his assigned spot. When confronted, Troy shrugged. "The art collective fell through," he explained, not quite meeting my eyes. "But transportation is an investment too. Now I can save on gas." That night I cried until my throat hurt. My friend Diane, who had witnessed many such disappointments over the years, suggested I join her support group for parents of adult children. "You're not helping him by being his safety net," she said, pouring me another cup of tea. "You're just delaying the inevitable crash." I resisted her advice initially, telling myself that Troy just needed more time to mature. But as his requests grew more frequent, and his attitude more entitled, resentment began to crowd out my usual reflexive generosity. When he called asking for concert tickets that cost more than my monthly grocery budget, I found myself saying no for the first time in years. His response was immediate and vicious. "You spend money on all sorts of stupid things," he said. "You just don't want me to be happy." When I reminded him of the motorcycle and other expenses I had covered, he hung up on me. The arguments increased in frequency and intensity. At a family dinner, he berated me in front of my sister for serving chicken instead of steak. "You know I hate chicken," he said, though it had been his favorite throughout childhood. At a cafe the following week, he created a scene when I declined to pay for his friend's meal in addition to his own. But the most humiliating incident occurred at my birthday dinner 2 months ago. Diane and 3 other friends from my nursing days had taken me to a nice restaurant downtown. Midway through our meal, Troy appeared pulling up a chair without being invited. After minimal greetings, he launched into a story about his car breaking down, concluding with, so I need $800 by tomorrow or they won't release it from the shop. My friends exchanged uncomfortable glances as I fumbled through my purse for my credit card. Later in the parking lot, Diane was uncharacteristically blunt. "That wasn't about a car," she said. "That was about establishing dominance, showing that he can interrupt your birthday and still get what he wants." The following week, I finally took her advice and made an appointment with Dr. Levinson, a therapist specializing in family relationships. After listening to my halting description of our dynamic, she leaned forward in her chair. "Cherie," she said, "what you're describing isn't support, it's enabling. There's a profound difference." That word, enabling, echoed in my mind for days. I began to see our relationship through a new lens, recognizing how my fear of conflict and desire to protect Troy had actually stunted his growth. Like a plant that never develops strong roots because it's never exposed to wind, Troy had never developed resilience because I had sheltered him from the natural consequences of his choices. As this realization solidified, I felt something shift inside me. The maternal instinct to rescue him remained powerful, but alongside it grew a new understanding that true love might look different than I had imagined. Perhaps the most caring thing I could do for my son was to step back and let him stand on his own. The breaking point arrived with brutal efficiency. Despite his supposedly stable job, Troy called 3 months in a row asking for rent money. The first time he claimed a paycheck delay. The second, an unexpected medical bill. By the third month, his excuses had grown thinner, something vague about the company restructuring payment schedules. Growing suspicious, I did something I had never considered before. I called the design firm where Troy claimed to work, asking to speak with him about a family emergency. The receptionist's confused pause told me everything before she even spoke. "I'm sorry, but there's no Troy working here." After a moment, she added, "We did have a Troy who worked part-time in our mailroom about 2 months ago, but he only stayed for a few weeks." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Troy hadn't just been exaggerating or stretching the truth, he had been fabricating an entire career. The stable job he described in such detail, the colleagues he mentioned by name, the projects he claimed to be working on all, were elaborate fictions. When Troy arrived at my house that evening, presumably for another request, I was waiting with printouts of my bank statements, showing every transfer I had made to him over the past year, totaling nearly $20,000. "Before we talk," I said, as calmly as I could manage, "I'd like you to explain why the company you claim to work for has never heard of you." His expression cycled rapidly through shock, defensive anger, and finally a calculated regret that didn't reach his eyes. "I was going to tell you," he said, sinking onto my couch. "I did work there, but it was temporary. I've been freelancing since then, building my portfolio." "Freelancing," I repeated. "And has this freelancing paid you anything?" "Not yet, but I'm laying groundwork for bigger opportunities." His voice took on the passionate quality that had swayed me so many times before. "I'm making connections that will pay off soon. I just need a little more support until then." In that moment, I saw with painful clarity how this conversation would normally proceed. Troy would make promises, I would express doubts, he would become indignant, I would feel guilty, and ultimately I would give him the money to avoid conflict and assuage my own anxiety about his welfare. The familiar script stretched before us like a well-worn path. "No," I said, surprising myself with the steadiness in my voice. "No more money, Troy. You're 34 years old. If you can't pay your rent, you need to find a real job, not a theoretical one." His face darkened. "You don't understand how the creative industry works. You've always been so conventional, so narrow-minded." The words spilled out faster, sharper. "You want me to waste my talent in some corporate job just because you're too scared to invest in my future." "This isn't investment," I replied, gesturing to the bank statements. "This is subsidizing an adult who refuses to support himself." That's when Troy truly lost his temper. He paced my living room, voice rising as he cataloged my failings as a mother, my inability to understand his needs, my fundamental toxicity. "You're controlling," he shouted. "You use money to manipulate me. You've never believed in me. You're the reason I can't succeed." Each accusation landed like a slap, but beneath the pain something else was growing, a clarity I had lacked for years. As Troy's tirade continued, I found myself observing rather than just reacting, seeing the manipulation behind the anger, the calculated way he deployed guilt as a weapon. When he finally stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle my china cabinet, I expected to feel the familiar rush of remorse that usually sent me hurrying after him with apologies and compromises. Instead, I felt oddly calm, if deeply sad. The text came 3 hours later. "I need space from your negative energy. You're toxic and controlling, and you're holding me back. Don't contact me until you're ready to apologize and support me properly. I deserve better than this." Before I could formulate a response, my phone alerted me that I had been blocked. Attempts to call went straight to voicemail. My texts bounced back undelivered. Within an hour, I discovered he had also blocked me on every social media platform we shared. That night was one of the longest of my life. I moved through my quiet house like a ghost, picking up framed photos of Troy, through the years tracing his progression from a gap-toothed child to a sullen teenager to a handsome but troubled young man. Each image held not just the moment it captured, but the memories surrounding it, the complex emotional terrain of 3 decades of motherhood. The pain was unlike anything I had experienced since Douglas died, a hollowing out from the inside. I had spent so many years defining myself through Troy's needs that his absence left me unsteady, unsure of my own identity and worth. The first few days I made desperate attempts to reach him. I called mutual friends asking them to pass messages. I drove by his apartment, noting with relief that his car was still there, but losing courage before I could knock on his door. I even wrote a lengthy email that stopped short of apologizing, but expressed my unconditional love and willingness to talk. The silence stretched on unyielding. A week passed, then 2. The constant anxiety began to give way to a dull ache and surprisingly moments of quiet reflection. Without the regular interruptions of Troy's crises, I found time to think about my own neglected needs and desires. I rediscovered the simple pleasure of reading, without interruption of planning my day, without anticipating emergency calls. During the 3rd week of silence while sorting through old photos, I came across an album from before Troy was born. There I was in my graduation from nursing school, beaming with pride and purpose. There were pictures of Douglas and me hiking, attending concerts, surrounded by friends. The woman in those photos had interests, friendships, ambitions that extended beyond motherhood. Looking at that younger self, I felt an unexpected pang of loss, not just for Douglas and our cut-short life together, but for the woman. I had been the woman who had gradually disappeared into the all-consuming role of Troy's mother and safety net. That night I couldn't sleep my mind, replaying years of interactions with Troy, seeing patterns I had been too close to recognize, the one-sided nature of our relationship. The way his affection correlated directly with my usefulness to him. The absence of genuine interest in my life or well-being. The painful question arose, if I stopped giving, would there be any relationship left at all? By morning, I had made a decision that felt both terrifying and necessary. I would stop chasing after Troy. I would respect the silence he had imposed, not as a punishment for him, but as an opportunity for me. An opportunity to rediscover who I was apart from my son's constant needs, to rebuild the strength and identity I had gradually surrendered. As the sun rose, casting long shadows across my bedroom, I whispered a truth I had been avoiding for years. I love my son, but I cannot fix him. And it's time I stopped trying. The first week after making this decision was physically painful. I would reach for my phone dozens of times, daily muscle memory driving me to check for messages that weren't there. Sleep came in brief, troubled intervals. Food lost its taste. Friends called, but I let their concerned messages pile up, unable to explain what was happening. On the 8th day of this fog, my doorbell rang. It was Diane, holding a casserole and wearing the determined expression I recognized from our nursing days. "You're not answering calls," she said, brushing past me into the house. "So I brought dinner, and I'm not leaving until you eat something and tell me what's going on." Over that casserole, the whole story spilled out, my voice breaking, as I described Troy's blocking and my decision to stop pursuing contact. I expected judgment or perhaps well-meaning advice to try harder. Instead, Diane reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "It's about time," she said gently. "I've watched him drain you for years. Maybe this break is exactly what you both need." Her acceptance cracked something open inside me. The tears that came then were different, not the desperate sobs of the previous weeks, but a cleansing release. When they finally subsided, I felt lighter than I had in years. That conversation marked the beginning of my recovery. Diane insisted I join her the following evening for a meeting of her support group, Parents Moving Forward. Walking into that community center room, seeing 8 strangers who would become vital to my healing, I felt both terrified and strangely hopeful. "My name is Cherie," I said when my turn came, voice barely audible. "My son has cut me off after years of financial dependence. I don't know who I am without his needs to fulfill." The nodding heads around the circle told me I wasn't alone. One by one, they shared stories with painful similarities to mine. Children battling addiction. Children exploiting their parents' resources while rejecting their guidance. Children using access to grandchildren as leverage for financial support. Each story different in its details, but connected by the common thread of parents learning to establish boundaries with adult children who refuse to embrace responsibility. Among these new friends, Judith became especially important to me. 10 years older and 5 years further along in her journey with an estranged son, she offered perspective I desperately needed. "The hardest part to accept," she told me during one of our coffee meetups, "is that our children must walk their own paths. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is step aside and let them feel the natural consequences of their choices." Those words became a mantra as I navigated my new reality. I began to reclaim aspects of myself that had been dormant during Troy's constant crises. I found my old sketchbook in the attic, remembering how I had once loved drawing landscapes before Troy's artistic talent had eclipsed my modest hobby. My first attempts were embarrassingly rusty, but the simple act of creating something brought unexpected joy. Music returned to my life as well. Douglas and I had been avid concert-goers in our early years, together a passion that had faded after his death when childcare and work consumed my energy. On a whim, I bought a ticket to a classical performance at the community college. Sitting in that auditorium, letting the violin concerto wash over me, I experienced my first moment of pure, uncomplicated happiness since Troy's departure from my life. The most significant change came from an unexpected source. For years, I had postponed a dream trip to Arizona to see the Grand Canyon, always finding reasons to redirect the funds to Troy's latest emergency. 3 weeks after our final confrontation, I sat at my kitchen table and booked the flight and accommodations, my hand trembling slightly as I confirmed the payment. Standing at the canyon rim a month later, watching the play of light and shadow across that vast expanse, I felt something profound shift inside me. The immensity of the landscape put my troubles in perspective. The canyon had been carved over millions of years by the patient, persistent force of water, a reminder that profound change rarely happens all at once, but through consistent small actions over time. I returned home with a clarity I had lacked before. The constant calls from unknown numbers which I had once anxiously answered, hoping to hear Troy's voice, I now let go to voicemail. When friends awkwardly mentioned seeing Troy around town, I thanked them for the information without pressing for details or asking them to carry messages. At Judith's suggestion, I made an appointment with a financial advisor, different from the one who had been managing my retirement. This new perspective was illuminating. "Even with the withdrawals you've made," the advisor said, reviewing my accounts, "you're not in terrible shape. If we create a strict budget and make no further unplanned withdrawals, you can still have a secure retirement." For the first time in years, I began sleeping through the night. My appetite returned, and with it, a few welcome pounds on my too-thin frame. Friends commented on the change in my appearance, the new spark in my eyes, the absence of the perpetual worry lines that had marked my forehead. Perhaps most surprising was the feeling that began to emerge as weeks passed without contact from Troy, a feeling so unexpected, I hardly dared name it even to myself. Relief. Relief from the constant anxiety of waiting for the next crisis. Relief from the emotional manipulation. Relief from watching someone I loved make self-destructive choices I could neither prevent nor fix. This relief brought guilt in its wake, of course. What kind of mother feels relieved by her child's absence? But in my support group, such feelings were normalized, even celebrated as signs of healthy detachment. "Guilt is just love with a question mark," Judith told me. "You're questioning whether your love is valid if it doesn't involve self-sacrifice." The answer is yes, it absolutely is. 6 weeks after Troy's text, I made another significant change. The spare bedroom that had remained perpetually ready for Troy's inevitable return, I transformed into an art studio, moving in a desk, proper lighting, and quality art supplies. This symbolic reclaiming of space in my home represented the larger reclamation happening in my life. Standing in that sunlit room surrounded by possibilities rather than memories, I had a sudden powerful realization. For years I had viewed myself as an incomplete entity, a satellite orbiting Troy's needs and problems. Now I was rediscovering my own gravity, my own center. I was not just Troy's mother. I was Cherie, a whole and complete person with interests, friendships, and a future that belonged to me. That night I wrote in my journal a practice recommended by my support group. Today I realized something important. In trying to prevent Troy from experiencing failure, I've been failing myself. No more. Whatever happens next, I am committed to my own well-being. Not selfishly, but because a depleted, resentful mother helps no one, least of all her child. I signed my full name, something I hadn't done since nursing school, a small but significant acknowledgement of my reclaimed identity. Life settled into a new rhythm. My days, once structured around Troy's unpredictable needs, now followed patterns of my choosing. Morning walks with Judith, afternoon volunteering at the community center, evening art classes or support group meetings. Small pleasures that had once seemed insignificant now formed the sturdy foundation of my rebuilt life. The call came on a Tuesday evening, 7 weeks after Troy's blocking text. I was cleaning up after dinner when my phone displayed a name I hadn't seen in months. Lisa, the mother of one of Troy's high school friends. We had once been close, carpooling our sons to school events and commiserating over teenage drama, but had gradually lost touch as our children grew apart. Cherie, she said, when I answered, her voice careful, I ran into Michael yesterday. He mentioned something that made me think I should call you. Michael was Troy's friend from art school, one of the few I had genuinely liked. Responsible and thoughtful, he had maintained a friendship with Troy, despite their increasingly divergent paths. Michael, pursuing a stable career in graphic design, while Troy chased his ever-shifting artistic vision. Michael said Troy's been evicted from his apartment. Lisa continued when I didn't immediately respond. He thought you might not know. The news landed oddly a distant concern rather than the immediate panic it would once have triggered. Thank you for letting me know, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Do you know if he's okay? Michael said he's been staying on friends' couches, but it's getting tense. Apparently he's running out of welcome. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table absorbing this information. The eviction didn't surprise me. Without my financial support, it had been only a matter of time before Troy's precarious situation collapsed. What surprised me was my own reaction, the absence of the frantic need to fix things that had been my default response for decades. Over the next few days, more information trickled in through mutual acquaintances. Troy had indeed been evicted for non-payment 3 weeks after our confrontation, roughly a month after blocking my number. The part-time job he had claimed was interfering with his art had never existed. The friends he had initially stayed with had grown tired of his presence, his tendency to eat their food without contributing, his assumption that their homes were available to him indefinitely without reciprocation. I absorbed these updates with a combination of maternal concern and newfound detachment, like watching a storm from behind thick glass. I cared deeply about Troy's well-being, but recognized that rushing in to rescue him would only continue the destructive cycle we had been locked in for years. The unexpected call came 10 days after I learned of the eviction. An unfamiliar number with our local area code. Normally, I would have answered immediately, but something made me hesitate. I let it ring, watching the unknown number flash on my screen until it went to voicemail. A minute later, the notification appeared. One new voicemail. My hand trembled slightly as I pressed play and heard Troy's voice for the first time in nearly 2 months. "Mom, it's me." His voice sounded tired, strained. "I'm calling from Garrett's phone because mine got shut off. I need to talk to you. It's important. Call me back at this number." No apology. No acknowledgement of the silence or his role in creating it. Just the assumption that I would respond to his summons as I always had before. I set the phone down without returning the call, a small act of self-preservation that would have been unthinkable months earlier. In my support group, we had discussed the concept of earned reconciliation, the idea that rebuilding trust requires effort from the person who damaged it. Troy's message contained no such effort, no recognition of the harm done or commitment to change. The calls continued over the next 3 days, sometimes from Garrett's number, sometimes from other unfamiliar lines. I let them all go to voicemail, listening to Troy's increasingly frustrated messages but maintaining my silence. His tone evolved from assumption to confusion to anger, reflecting his disbelief that I wasn't responding as expected. On the fourth day, text messages began arriving from numbers I didn't recognize. "Mom, I know you're getting these. Why are you ignoring me? I thought mothers were supposed to be there no matter what." Each message hit a well-worn trigger point, each designed consciously or not, to activate my guilt and sense of maternal obligation. In my weakest moments, usually late at night, I drafted responses pouring out my hurt and disappointment, or offering careful conditions for renewed contact. I deleted them all unsent, recognizing that I wasn't yet ready for the conversation that needed to happen. Instead, I brought the situation to my support group, sharing my struggle with maintaining boundaries while worrying about Troy's welfare. The responses were thoughtful, but firm. "He's an able-bodied adult," reminded Hurled, whose daughter had struggled with similar issues. "He has options beyond your living room couch." A week after the calls began, I ran into Garrett at the grocery store, an awkward encounter in the produce section that confirmed my instincts about maintaining distance. "Troy's been trying to reach you," he said, selecting an apple with studied casualness. "I'm aware," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. Garrett shifted uncomfortably. "He's been staying with me, but my girlfriend isn't happy about it. He thought maybe he could crash at your place for a while, just until he gets back on his feet." There it was, the real purpose behind the sudden renewal of contact. Not reconciliation or relationship, but need for housing. In that fluorescent-lit aisle, surrounded by ordinary shoppers going about their ordinary days, I felt a profound sadness, but also a clarity that had been hard-won. "Troy is welcome to call me when he's ready to talk honestly," I said, "but moving back in isn't an option right now." Garrett's surprise was evident. "But he's your son. Where's he supposed to go?" "There are options," I said, thinking of the research I'd done since learning of the eviction. "Roommate situations, shared housing, even temporary shelters if necessary. Troy is capable and intelligent. He can navigate this." Garrett's expression shifted from surprise to something like respect. "I'll tell him you said that." As I drove home, I realized that this interaction represented a fundamental shift in my approach to Troy. For the first time, I had articulated out loud my belief in his capability, rather than his helplessness. I had acknowledged that while I cared deeply about his situation, I was no longer willing to sacrifice my well-being to solve problems he was equipped to address himself. That evening, I received a text from an unknown number that could only be Troy. "Garrett told me what you said. I can't believe you'd let your own son be homeless. I guess I know where I stand now." The message stung, but beneath the hurt I recognized the manipulation, the false binary being presented. Either I must open my home unconditionally, or I didn't love my son. This twisted logic had governed our relationship for too long. I set the phone aside without responding and went to bed. For the first time since the calls had begun, I slept soundly through the night, anchored by the growing certainty that I was making the right choice not just for myself, but ultimately for Troy as well. The knock came at 9:15 on a Saturday morning, 3 sharp raps that echoed through my quiet house. I knew before opening the door who it would be. Something in the rhythm of that knock, impatient and entitled, was uniquely Troy's. I paused in the hallway, steadying myself with a deep breath before turning the knob. And there he stood on my front porch, thinner than I remembered, dark circles under his eyes, but still handsome in the way that had always made people give him second chances. Behind him sat 2 large suitcases and several garbage bags stuffed with what appeared to be clothing. "Hi, Mom," he said, his voice carrying a forced casualness that didn't match the intensity in his eyes. I thought it would be better to talk in person. I remained in the doorway, neither retreating into the house nor stepping aside to invite him in. "Hello, Troy. I wasn't expecting you." His gaze flickered past me into the house, then returned to my face. "Can I come in? It's kind of awkward talking on the porch." In that moment, I understood with complete clarity what was happening. This wasn't a visit or an attempt at reconciliation. This was Troy arriving with his belongings, assuming that despite everything, my door would always be open to him. The realization brought a strange calm, a certainty about what needed to happen next. "I think the porch is fine for now," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "What did you want to talk about?" Confusion crossed his face, followed by a flash of irritation. About me staying here, obviously. Garrett's girlfriend is being unreasonable and I don't have anywhere else to go right now. He gestured toward his luggage. Just until I get things sorted out. I took a deep breath, consciously relaxing my shoulders. I'm sorry you're in a difficult situation, Troy, but moving back in isn't an option right now. The words hung between us, seeming to distort the air on my sunlit porch. Troy's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief, to the beginning of anger, a progression I had witnessed countless times before, but was only now seeing with true clarity. You can't be serious, he said, voice rising. You're going to leave me homeless. Your own son. You're not homeless, I replied steadily. You have options that don't include moving back in with me. That's when the real explosion began. Troy paced the porch, gesturing wildly, his voice growing louder with each accusation. I knew you were mad, but I didn't think you'd stoop this low. What kind of mother turns away her child? What kind of person are you? Mrs. Henderson from next door paused in watering her flowers, watching our confrontation with poorly concealed interest. On the street, a jogger slowed his pace, glancing toward the commotion. The public nature of this scene would once have mortified me into immediate capitulation, doing anything to avoid neighbors witnessing family discord. Now I found I didn't care who saw. The truth was not something I needed to hide. I'm a person who loves you enough to stop enabling behavior that hurts both of us, I said, when Troy paused for breath. I'm a mother who believes her son is capable of supporting himself at 34. Troy's face flushed darker. This is about money, isn't it? You've always been so tight with money when it comes to helping me. The accusation was so divorced from reality that it almost made me laugh. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small notebook I had taken to carrying. In it, I had documented every financial contribution I'd made to Troy over the past 5 years, a staggering sum that represented nearly a third of my retirement savings. $3,000 for the art collective that became a motorcycle, I read calmly. $2,000 for dental work you never had done. 6 months of rent payments while you claimed to be building your portfolio. A car down payment. Insurance premiums. Credit card payments. I looked up from the list. That's just last year, Troy. His expression flickered a momentary recognition of truth before the defensive anger returned. You're keeping score, tallying up what you've spent on your child like I'm some kind of investment that didn't pay off. No, I said. I'm establishing reality. You've accused me of withholding financial support when the opposite is true. I've supported you well into adulthood at significant cost to my own security. Troy's strategy shifted, moving from anger to emotional manipulation, a transition I had seen many times, but never fully recognized for what it was. I thought you believed in me, he said, his voice dropping, taking on a wounded quality. I thought you understood that artists need support to establish themselves. Not everyone follows a conventional path, Mom. This isn't about your path, I replied. It's about basic adult responsibility. I believe in your talent, Troy. I always have. But talent doesn't entitle you to unlimited support from others. For a moment, something like genuine hurt crossed his face, and my resolve wavered. This was my child, the baby I had nursed, the boy whose nightmares I had soothed, the young man whose accomplishments I had celebrated. The instinct to protect him, to make his path easier, remained powerful despite everything. Troy sensed the hesitation. I just need a little time to get back on my feet, he said, voice gentler now. A few months, maybe? I'll look for a job right away. Things will be different this time. In that moment, I could see the entire cycle preparing to repeat itself. The initial compliance and effort, the gradual slide into excuses and entitlement, the inevitable conflicts when boundaries were attempted. The pattern was as clear as a medical chart, the prognosis predictable if nothing changed. I reached into my purse and removed a piece of paper I had prepared weeks earlier after first learning of Troy's eviction. I won't offer you housing, I said, extending the paper toward him, but I will offer help finding your own place and employment. This has information on the County Housing Assistance Program, 3 employment agencies specializing in creative fields, and 2 apartment share websites that don't require large deposits. Troy stared at the paper without taking it. You made a resource list instead of just helping me. That's cold, Mom. Really cold. It's the kind of help you actually need, I said, still holding out the paper. I'll help you make calls. I'll give you rides to interviews. I'll even help with a security deposit once you've found legitimate employment. But I won't provide housing or ongoing financial support. The tension between us stretched tight as piano wire. In Troy's eyes, I could see him calculating, assessing whether compliance might still get him through the door, whether this was a negotiating position rather than a firm boundary. When he spoke again, his voice had an edge I recognized as dangerous. You know what? Keep your list. Keep your conditions. Keep your precious boundaries. He spat the word like an obscenity. A real mother would help first and ask questions later. A real mother wouldn't let her pride get in the way of taking care of her child. This isn't pride, Troy. It's love, but not the kind you want. It's love that believes you're capable of more than you've settled for. He grabbed his largest suitcase, his movements jerky with anger. You're choosing money over family. I hope you enjoy your comfortable retirement while I'm struggling. I hope it makes you happy to know you could have helped and chose not to. Each accusation was designed to land precisely on my deepest insecurities, my most vulnerable points as a mother. Months earlier, they would have worked perfectly, sending me into a spiral of guilt and self-doubt. Now I recognize them for what they were, the desperate tactics of someone whose control was slipping. I love you, Troy, I said as he wrestled with his luggage. That hasn't changed. When you're ready to build a healthier relationship, one based on mutual respect rather than dependence, my door is open. But only for that. He didn't respond, didn't look back, as he dragged his belongings down my front walk to where a car waited at the curb, Garrett behind the wheel, looking uncomfortably straight ahead. I watched until they drove away, Troy's face set in stone, before closing my door quietly. I expected to collapse then, to feel the crushing weight of grief and guilt that had always followed confrontations with Troy. Instead, I experienced something entirely unexpected, a profound sense of peace. Not happiness, certainly, but a quiet certainty that I had finally done what was necessary for both of us. I moved through my house, making tea with deliberate care, then sat in my favorite chair by the window. Outside, spring was asserting itself in my neglected garden, new growth pushing through the soil with quiet persistence. Like those plants, I too was growing in new directions, establishing roots that were entirely my own. 6 months passed, transforming my life in ways both subtle and profound. The initial raw pain of that confrontation on my porch gradually mellowed into something more complex, a bittersweet acknowledgement that sometimes love requires distance to flourish. My circle expanded in unexpected directions. The support group that had been my lifeline during the initial crisis became a source of deep friendship. Judith and I began taking weekend day trips to nearby state parks, discovering a shared love of birdwatching. Harold from the group introduced me to his sister, a retired art teacher who invited me to join her plein-air painting group. Through mutual acquaintances, I received occasional updates about Troy. After the confrontation, he had apparently stayed with Garrett for only 3 more days before moving on to another friend's couch. By the 3rd week, he had exhausted his welcome with most of his social circle. Facing the real possibility of actual homelessness, he had finally taken a job at a local print shop, work he had previously dismissed as beneath his talents. At Judith's suggestion, I opened a separate savings account, depositing the money I would have given Troy into it each month. Not for him, she clarified when I explained what I was doing. For you, to quantify your progress and create a tangible reminder of your boundary maintenance. Watching that account grow became a source of quiet satisfaction, not because of the money itself, but because of what it represented: my commitment to my own well-being. My volunteer work at the women's shelter began almost accidentally. I had donated some of my unused art supplies, and the director, learning I had been a nurse, asked if I might consider leading a weekly art therapy group. Many of our residents are rebuilding their lives after leaving controlling relationships, she explained. Creative expression can be powerfully healing. That first session was terrifying, my voice shaking as I introduced myself to 8 women whose life experiences seemed so different from mine. Yet as we began the simple collage project I had planned, similarities emerged. We had all surrendered pieces of ourselves to unhealthy relationships. We had all faced the terrifying prospect of reclaiming our identities and standing alone. We had all discovered strength we hadn't known we possessed. One participant, Marissa, stayed after the session to help clean up. The way you talked about boundaries, she said carefully, washing brushes at the sink. It really hit home. I've always thought love meant never saying no, especially to my kids. I thought that too, I replied. For most of my life, actually. What changed your mind? I considered the question carefully, realizing that by trying to protect my son from all consequences, I was actually preventing him from developing the resilience he needed. Real love wants growth, not dependency. Marissa nodded slowly. I'm going to remember that. These conversations became a regular part of my Weak Women, sharing stories and insights supporting each other through the difficult work of rebuilding lives and relationships. In helping others navigate their boundaries, I strengthened my own each shared experience, reinforcing my growing confidence in the choices I had made. An unexpected reconciliation occurred around this time, not with Troy, but with my sister Margaret. Our relationship had been strained for years, primarily due to her open criticism of how I raised Troy. You're creating a monster, she had said at a family gathering when Troy was in his 20s after witnessing one of his entitled outbursts. The comment had created a rift that widened over the years, fed by my defensive justifications of Troy's behavior and my parenting choices. Now, with new perspective, I reached out with a phone call that turned into a 3-hour conversation, tears flowing freely on both sides. I was so angry with you, I admitted. I thought you were judging me when I was doing my best. I was worried about you both, Margaret replied. But I handled it badly. I should have found a gentler way to express my concerns. That conversation led to a visit Margaret driving 6 hours to spend a weekend at my home. Sitting in my new art studio, she looked around with evident pleasure. You're painting again, she observed. I remember how much you loved it before Troy was born. I'm rediscovering a lot of things I used to love, I said, and discovering some new ones, too. You seem different, she said, studying me, with the particular attention of someone who shares your DNA. Lighter somehow. I am, I replied, recognizing the truth in her observation. Stronger, too. Through Margaret, I learned that Troy had been attending counseling sessions at a community mental health center, information that filled me with cautious hope. The counseling had been a requirement after a minor legal issue, a dispute with a roommate that had escalated to property damage, but regardless of what had prompted it, the fact that Troy was receiving professional support felt like a positive development. The unexpected encounter came on a Tuesday afternoon at Westfield Market. I was selecting avocados when I sensed someone nearby and looked up to see Troy, a shopping basket over his arm, frozen, in apparent indecision about whether to approach or retreat. Hello, Troy, I said, my voice surprisingly steady, despite my racing heart. Mom, he replied, shifting his weight awkwardly. I didn't expect to see you here. I shop here every week, I said. They have the best produce section in town. This mundane exchange felt surreal, after months of silence, yet also oddly appropriate, a neutral ground on which to cautiously meet. Troy looked better than he had during our last encounter. Less gaunt, his clothes clean, if not new. The dark circles under his eyes had faded. You look well, I said, meaning it. Thanks. He glanced at my basket. You're buying more vegetables than you used to. I joined a cooking class. Mediterranean cuisine. The conversation felt simultaneously strained and precious, a fragile bridge forming across a wide chasm. Troy nodded, eyes darting around as if searching for what to say next. I'm working at Printworks now, he finally offered. Almost 5 months. That's wonderful, I said, genuine pleasure warming my voice. Do you like it? It's okay. Better than I expected, actually. They let me design some stuff, not just run the machines. We stood in awkward silence for a moment before Troy spoke again. I'm seeing someone. A counselor, I mean. Dr. Ramirez at the community center. I'm glad, I said, simply resisting the urge to press for details or offer effusive praise that might seem patronizing. Troy shifted his basket to his other arm. I should probably finish shopping. My lunch break isn't very long. Of course. I hesitated, then added, It was good to see you, Troy. He nodded, a quick, jerky movement. You too. He started to turn away, then paused. Maybe we could talk sometime. Not about, moving in or money or anything. Just talk. Hope bloomed, cautious but real. I'd like that, I said, when you're ready. We parted without concrete plans, but the encounter left me with a quiet optimism I hadn't allowed myself to feel for months. Troy was working steadily, seeing a counselor, initiating contact without immediate demands. Small steps, perhaps, but significant ones. At home that evening, I sat in my garden with a cup of tea, reflecting on the strange path that had led to this moment. A year ago, I could not have imagined voluntarily maintaining distance from Troy, could not have pictured a life rebuilt around my own interests and needs, rather than his crises. The journey had been painful beyond words, yet necessary in ways I was only beginning to fully understand. The most profound lesson had emerged gradually from the chaos. True parental love is not measured by endless giving or infinite tolerance for harmful behavior. Sometimes love requires the courage to step back and allow natural consequences to unfold. Sometimes the most supportive thing we can do for our adult children is to trust in their capacity to solve their own problems. This understanding didn't eliminate the pain of our estrangement or erase my hopes for eventual reconciliation, but it had transformed my approach to both Troy and myself. I no longer viewed his struggles as reflections of my worth as a mother. I no longer saw my boundaries as selfish acts to apologize for. I had learned painfully but thoroughly that enabling is not helping, and that sacrifice is not always love. As twilight settled over my garden, I considered the possibility that someday Troy and I might build a new relationship, one founded on mutual respect rather than dependency. The path forward remained uncertain, but I faced that uncertainty with a hard-won serenity, knowing that whatever happened, I would be okay. The following morning, I received a text from a number I didn't recognize but immediately knew was Troy's. Would Wednesday at 6 work for coffee just to talk? I typed my reply carefully. Yes, that would be nice. The cafe on Maple. His response came quickly. See you then. I set the phone down, feeling neither overwhelming excitement nor anxiety, just a quiet acknowledgement that this was one step on a long journey. Whether that journey would lead to genuine reconciliation remained to be seen, but I was prepared to walk it with open eyes and clear boundaries, loving my son without losing myself in the process. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between helping someone you love and helping yourself? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in challenging family situations. Remember that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is to step back and allow growth to happen. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you find peace in your own journey of setting healthy boundaries.